The Atlanta Falcons aren't quite ready to make the bold splash for a quarterback on offense, but they are for the guy that's going to be the quarterback on defense. I'm talking about Cincinnati safety Jessie Bates with my guest on today's Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. You know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, and of course, the most humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started. And guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, it's free and available Monday through Friday in a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, get us over 5,000 subscribers, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And make sure you check us out on your Roku and Amazon Fire TV by downloading the Locked On Sports Atlanta app. So guys, today's episode, I am joined by my guest, Daniel Flick, who covers the Falcons for the FanNation, part of the Sports Illustrated Media Group. And we will have a wide-ranging conversation talking about, the question marks about the Falcons quarterback situation, who's going to be the headline grabber for their offseason. Is that Lamar Jackson? Is that Jessie Bates? We'll get into all of that, as well as the Shrine Bowl. Daniel was on hand there, and what Daniel's looking forward to the Combine, where he'll be also there in Indianapolis covering the Combine, as well as a breakout players for the Falcons in 2023. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Daniel Flick right now. All right, everyone, joined by another illustrious guest, and this is none other than Daniel Flick, who covers the Falcons for FanNation, part of the SI Media Group. He's written a lot of great articles, was in Las Vegas covering the Shrine Bowl practices. We'll be talking with him today about the Falcons offseason, some potential breakout candidates. We'll get his thoughts on maybe some Shrine Bowl guys that sort of stood out that may be on deck for your guys' mock draft simulators that you guys do throughout the offseason, and myself included. So that's the real reason. I just need a couple of late round guys from the Shrine Bowl that Daniel can recommend. So we'll get into all of that, as well as Daniel's going to be headed to Indianapolis to cover the Combine. So we'll get his thoughts on that all on. So with all that being said, let's jump right into sort of the big questions surrounding the Falcons. Who's going to be the starting quarterback week one, Daniel? Just your gut feeling on who that guy is going to be.
We're coming out firing, man. We are coming out hot with this one. It's obviously very tough. I'm gonna say that we get the Ridder Sans for one more year, at least. I think we're gonna see old Desmond Ridder get one more shot at it next year, or the shot at it next year. The way that the Falcons ownership group works, from what we've all heard, is that Arthur Blank is pretty satisfied with what Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot have put together through 2 years. I don't think their jobs are at I don't think they're at risk at the moment. And so I don't think they're going to enter year 3 in a must-win situation, which to me leads me to think that Ridder will get a shot next year. Just because I really, if there was a heightened sense of urgency, I think maybe there would be a greater chance of a Lamar Jackson. And I think Lamar would be a tremendous fit with the Falcons for sure. But I just think at the moment, with the way that the team has, I think $56 million in cap space at the moment, and the way that Arthur Blank has been known to run his franchise, I think there's a solid chance that Ridder starts next year, week 1.
Yeah, it does feel like the tenor of how they're talking about this team is different than it has been in past years, where it has felt like, this is a make break. Like, there was no bones about that going into 2020, that that was Dan Quinn had to get this team back to the playoffs or else.
Yep.
And we had a similar sort of notion going into 2014 with Mike Smith. It doesn't feel like we're at that point yet with Arthur Smith. And you seem to think that's going to lead the team to be maybe a little bit less aggressive going after Lamar Jackson, correct?
Yeah, that's how I would word it. I think they might be involved a little bit, but considering where they're at now, they finally have kind of emerged from all the financial troubles that they've had. I think they're more focused on creating a stronger foundation around the quarterback position and trying to see if Ridder can maybe take the next step that maybe he showed promise of in his 4-game stretch to end the year.
So quick question on that point.
Mhm.
Does it feel like this team is maybe, obviously a lot depends on what Desmond Ridder does, assuming that he's going to be the starter this year. But do you feel like this is a situation where the Falcons may be looking to make that big, bold, blockbuster move next year or 2 years from now? Do you feel like you have a feel for the timeline on potentially that?
Yeah, I think that's why they would tend to lean with Ridder, is to open up the possibility for that. Is, obviously you've got the quarterback on the rookie contract now. You're not committing to something where you're tied down moving forward. I think with Ridder, considering, like I just said, they're not really on the hot seat, Fontenot and Smith, that is, they're not really on the hot seat. I think they have an opportunity now to see what Ridder can do. And obviously, if you can get a 3rd-round quarterback to be the franchise, you've got a really good financial situation on your hands there for at least the remainder of his rookie contract. And so I think with that being said, you kind of wouldn't necessarily have to commit all the eggs into him for 2024 just by committing to him for 2023. And especially when you consider that the 2024 quarterback class, obviously, the following year's quarterback class is always supposed to be great, right?
Yeah,
no matter the year, no matter the situation. But I 2024, by all accounts, looks really, really encouraging. You got Heisman winner Caleb Williams, Drake May, several other really good options. So whether or not they're looking that far ahead, they would never admit that they are. I feel like they're probably cognizant of that. But I think there are more options available maybe next year as far as maybe whether it be a trade or a free agency, but especially in the draft. And obviously every team is always chasing that quarterback on a rookie contract. So I think financially, with Ridder, you're probably looking more at maybe a short-term commitment to see if he can become the long-term investment.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. We will continue today's episode talking about other big moves that may not be related to acquiring Lamar Jackson that the Falcons can make. And I feel like Daniel's also a big fan of the whatever it takes mantra to get Jessie Bates in Atlanta. So we will see if that is the headline grabbing move that he'll predict the Falcons will make this offseason. And we'll get into all of that as we continue today's episode. But first, guys, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Built Bar. Everybody's trying to eat healthier this time of year. And if you're trying to eat healthy and not compromise on taste, Built Bar is the thing for you. And the thing that makes Built Bar so good is they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They taste just like a candy bar, but they have incredible macros. You have only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, but a whopping 17 grams of protein. And for years, we've told you to go to built.com. And you can still go there to check out the various new flavors and the sales that they have going on. But more importantly, guys, you can now head to your local Walmart or Sam's Club to get your box of Built Bars. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart, walk to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a 4-bar box of cookies and cream and double chocolate. And if you're at Sam's, run in and grab a 13-bar box of peanut butter brownie or coconut almond. Trust me, you will thank me later. So continuing today's episode here with Daniel Flick, who covers the Falcons for FanNation, part of Sports Illustrated Media Group. We talked about the notion that Desmond Ridder is probably going to be the Falcons quarterback, which I tend to agree on that sentiment. Although, of course, certainly a big blockbuster trade for Lamar Jackson will be getting the big headlines. And, there's going to be a lot of talk and conversation over the next couple of weeks leading up to that March 7th franchise tag deadline on where Lamar Jackson is going to play this upcoming season. But with that sort of off the table, what to you, if you're going to make a big, bold prediction, what to you is going to be sort of the big headline grabbing move, whether that's a free agent signing, whether that's a draft pick, whether that's another type of trade that you think the Falcons could make this offseason?
I'm gonna roll with this one. I'm gonna say the Falcons commit a long-term contract to Cincinnati Bengals safety Jessie Bates III. That's my take personally. I think that obviously, as you and I are firmly on the same page with is that he could be instrumental to helping Richie Grant by, you know, kind of taking a little bit less off of his plate as far as playing single high, and kind of letting him attack more in the box. And so I think when you're putting heavy money into a player and you've got, you know, you're not trying to tie yourself up into bad contracts, the best thing that you can do is put money into a player that can help you in more ways than just maybe what he is, you know, strong at. Right. And so Jessie Bates is obviously a very, very talented single high safety. He's got a ton of range, really can kind of improve. I feel like the Falcons' overall turnover numbers, which have been lacking for the last several years. But he can also really help to continue the growth of Richie Grant. I think he took a great step forward from year 1 to year 2. He, I think, was the 4th leading tackler among safeties in the NFL with 123. If you get Jessie Bates in there, I think Richie Grant is going to keep on climbing. So that's my hot take as far as free agency, kind of my hot take for the offseason. But, you know, I'm not sure that's really a hot take anymore. But
yeah,
that's what
I'm doing my best to spread the gospel on Jessie Bates. So
fighting a good fight.
Yeah, hopefully by the time we get to free agency in 2-3 weeks, you know, every Falcon fan will be like, yes, Jessie Bates. That is my mission, to put his name on everybody's lips going into mid-March. But you mentioned Richie Grant, and you know, usually we save these questions for the summer, where it's like, okay, who's going to be the guy that breaks out this year? But I'm just curious, just from your personal perspective, like, is there a particular player on the Falcons that you are circling as a guy that you expect or hope or whatever that's going to have a breakout 2023? And is that Richie Grant due to the potential impact of Jessie Bates, or is there somebody else on this roster that you have your eye on?
Yeah, so I'm not going to say Richie Grant had his breakout last year, but I definitely think that he kind of emerged into a point where if he has another really good 2023, I wouldn't call it a breakout necessarily. Similar deal with Taquan Graham. I feel like he'd be a valid answer here as well, and I think he's going to have a good 2023. But I think he kind of took a big enough step from his rookie year to this past year where it's not necessarily a huge breakout. The answer that I'm going to give you is Arnold Ebiketie. Second year, he'll be entering year 2, outside linebacker out of Penn State. Here's why. So if you look at Arnold Ebiketie, before he injured his forearm in week 13, if I'm not mistaken, week 12, I think it was, whenever they played Washington, he got hurt. The 2 games before that, I want to say he had a combined 3 or 4 quarterback hits, a sack. I think it was like 1.5 sacks, a couple of tackles for loss. And then in that Washington game, he played, I think, 8 or 9 snaps, had a quarterback hit already, and got hurt in the first quarter. He was really trending in the right direction, was really playing, in my mind, he was the best pass rusher the Falcons had for that maybe 2.5, 3 game spurt before he got hurt. And, you know, after the injury, you know, he never really fully healed, I'm pretty sure. And the end of year production really wasn't there, but the talent always was, right? The talent was there when he was healthy. The production was there. So to me, I think he's really trending towards a big 2023. He talked a lot about how much he learned just as far as setting up offensive tackles and just learning how to be a pro. He said he learned how to be a pro. And I really think that year 1 to year 2 growth is so big. I mean, everybody talks about that. Arthur Smith talked about it. Fontenot's talked about it. I mean, it's so big. And I think Arnold Ebiketie really is primed to really take that next step in 2023.
Absolutely. Yeah. I figure I was sort of in my head trying to guess, okay, who's Daniel going to say? And I'm thinking he's either going to say Arnold Ebiketie, he's going to say Drake London, or Troy Anderson. And you landed on Ebiketie. So that makes sense. I feel like that trio is probably the core trio that I think most people are expecting bigger things from in 2023. And from each one of them, we saw flashes in 2022 that you hope that they can build upon. So I think Arnold Ebiketie is a guy that's going to be tasked with, you know, being a big part of what you hope to see a revamped defense for the Falcons in 2023, an improved defense. Hopefully Jessie Bates is part of that conversation.
Yep.
But, you know, part of the Falcons, you know, revamp and upgrade of their defense may come in the draft. And Daniel, since you were on hand in Las Vegas for the Shrine Bowl, I do want to kind of pick your brain on some of the standout players. We know that this regime loves their all-star game guys. They've heavily gone Senior Bowl, but
Yep.
it feels like this year is set up for them to sprinkle in a couple of Shrine Bowl game guys into their draft mix. And so I kind of want to pick your brain on a couple of guys that sort of stood out that you feel like could be those guys. And we'll get into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But first, I want to tell you about FanDuel. Since it is the midway point of the NBA season, it's the perfect time to check out FanDuel. If you guys are feeling some type of way about the NFL season being down, and if you're new to FanDuel, it's great because you can get in on their no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That means if your first bet doesn't win, you get bonus bets up to $1,000 back. So it's really no sweat for you just to, I wouldn't say throw your money away, but you could, be bold with your FanDuel bets, whether you want to pick money line point spreads, you want to pick who you think's going to win the NBA title. Like I think the Hawks are 65-1 odds to win the Eastern Conference. So if you just throw $20 on, the Hawks, hey, guess what? You can win over $1,000 on that bet, and you get potentially $1,000 on bonus bets if it doesn't necessarily win. So go download the FanDuel app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use, and make sure you use that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 where you get bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons here with Daniel Flick. Covers the Falcons, covered the Falcons extensively at the Shrine Bowl. He was my go-to analysis while I was down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and I was basically trying to catch up on Shrine Bowl, standouts. So headed over to SI.com to check out his write-ups there. But I'm curious, Daniel, did we learn anything about the Falcons, or did you learn anything, I guess, about the Falcons during that week, or was it kind of business as usual?
Yeah. Well, for me, one thing I learned is that inside linebackers coach Frank Bush is a very passionate individual. Very, very vocal guy, very passionate. I was probably about 3 feet away when he was just tearing into a couple of his linebackers there, which was a pretty cool thing to watch, but I mean, it was kind of an eye-opening experience for sure. But I think for the most part, it was kind of typical for what you'd expect out of a practice session, especially at an all-star game. Fontenot he oversaw the first session from a suite above the practice field. And then the next 3 days, he kind of made himself a little bit scarce. So I think the third session, he started on the field and then went back inside and then wasn't to be seen again. So Arthur Smith had a few conversations with the Titans assistant GM, but considering where he came from, I would imagine that's more of him catching up with an old friend than anything, of note. But as far as maybe, off the field stuff, there wasn't really a ton. I feel like that was unique about the all-star experience for them. But there was for sure a lot of standouts. I will say that on the field, there were a lot of standouts. I'm going to guess that's where we're heading next with this train.
Yeah. And, I basically, my question to you is, when everybody's doing their mock draft simulations, right? Everybody loves their 7-round mock drafts. Yeah. And it feels like pretty consistently over the last 2 drafts, the Falcons have very much targeted, in addition to underclassmen like a Drake London or a Kyle Pitts, when they've gone for seniors, it's been almost exclusively Senior Bowl guys. I think 10 out of the 11 seniors that they've drafted over the last 2 years have been Senior Bowl participants. The one outlier is Avery Williams, who was a Shrine Game invitee, but that was the year that the Shrine Game got canceled due to COVID. But it feels like because they got that firsthand knowledge of these players in Las Vegas this year, they're a big team in terms of having the guys with the right makeup, and you feel like they would have some insight into that with these guys getting to work with them for a couple of days of practice. Basically, I'm asking you, who are some guys that you would recommend to the listeners out there and the viewers out there that when they're doing their mock draft simulators, maybe sprinkle a couple of these guys in maybe the mid to late rounds of their mock drafts?
Yeah, there's one name that I would circle, underline, put about 5 exclamation points behind, and that's Louisville cornerback Kei'Trel Clark. Kei'Trel Clark, he's a bit undersized. I want to say he's about 5'9", 5'10", 170. He'll play nickel in the NFL. He's, in my eyes, he was the complete package at the Shrine Bowl. Off the field, when I interviewed him, he had his playbook with him. He was the only player that I saw the entire week there that had his playbook with him in the media room. They'd just come from lunch, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, he's bringing the playbook with him everywhere. He had a full pad of notes taken of every receiver he was facing in practice ahead of time. He filled out ahead of time, watched the film, took notes of everybody. He actually sent me the notes, a picture of the notes, and it was pretty interesting actually to see what he wrote. But on the field, he was very, very good the whole week, very sticky in coverage. He's got really good instincts. And even though he's a smaller guy, he's very feisty, very competitive, very physical. He was one of the guys I watched ahead of time that I was like, he's pretty impressive just because of the way that he plays and how much passion that he has. And also Frank Bush said that Clark is the player who flashed the most the entire week at the Shrine Bowl. That was the guy for him. It was Kei'Trel Clark. So when you factor everything into the equation, obviously Isaiah Oliver is a free agent. He's the starting nickel for the Falcons, obviously, but I think there's a chance that if he walks, I could really see them drafting Kei'Trel Clark. Moving on, up front on the defensive line, Moro Ojomo from Texas had a very good week. The Falcons drafted Taquan Graham from Texas 2 years ago. I see a little bit of Taquan Graham in Ojomo. Now, would they draft two of him? Honestly, I would take if I could have two Taquan Grahams, I would take two Taquan Grahams, me personally. But he's a penetrating 5 technique who can also play 3 tech. I actually asked Moro about the comp that I had with Taquan Graham, and he's like, I don't really see it a ton. But he actually watched quite a bit of the Falcons, he said last year, watching how they used Taquan. So that I found that to be pretty interesting, pretty noteworthy. There was a few other guys, I would say, at linebacker. So Tennessee linebacker Jeremy Banks was one of the guys that Frank Bush tore into. He was talking about how it's a job interview and the effort you're showing really isn't that of a job interview. And he was letting him have it. And then at the end of the week, he talked about how he said he's like I forget the exact word that he used, but he was very complimentary of Jeremy Banks. And so what I took away from that is that he felt like he could coach Jeremy Banks very hard and that he really saw progress maybe throughout the week and really was pleased with the way that he handled the coaching and the way that he took what he did with the coaching and translated that onto the practice field. So to me, kind of an abnormal way to reach a conclusion, but considering those are the kind of hands-on experiences that you're going to get at the Shrine Bowl, that's one thing I would point out. Offensively, A.T. Perry, wide receiver from Wake Forest. The way that they picked the Shrine Bowl rosters is that the Falcons picked every player on the East team. So they basically had the ability, whoever they liked, they could basically draft pretty much. I'm going to guess A.T. Perry was their first pick because he was the best player on the East team. He was the highest rated player coming in on the East team, and he played like it the whole week. Very, very interesting individual. We talked for 10 minutes in the interview and 10 minutes off the interview. I mean, he's nuanced. He knows what he's doing, and he's very good at the sport of football, which is an important part of playing in the NFL, I've heard. So I think that A.T. Perry is a real possibility, especially as maybe like a late 3rd round pick, maybe early 3rd round pick with where the Falcons are picking. So he's one that I'd keep an eye on for sure. Those are the East team players that I thought were particularly impressive. Maybe it kind of fit with what the Falcons prefer at the positions that they play. So that's kind of who I would circle for all of the mock draft. What's the word I'm looking for? Fanatics alike. Yeah, myself included.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, because I'm going to try to catch up on some of the Shrine Bowl guys that at least seem the most draftable over the next couple of weeks. And so I think I just watched Gervarrius Owens, the safety from Houston.
Okay. Yeah.
And I kind of liked what I saw from him. Very instinctual corner, not the rangiest, not the most physical guy, but like certainly a guy that I think would make a pretty solid backup and depth piece. And then I also, in the process of watching a couple of his games, saw Derek Parrish, the edge rusher / fullback. And of course, anybody who knows me knows any fullbacks are definitely going to be on my radar. And I didn't really get to see any snaps of him at fullback, but got to see some pass rush snaps. And I'm like, the way that he's knocking back tight ends, if he can do that to middle linebackers, then he'll make a really good fullback.
Yeah, he was actually a lot of fun at the Shrine Bowl because when they would do like running back, linebacker one-on-ones, he would basically flip sides. Like he'd do a rep at running back and a rep at linebacker, and he won just about every single one, regardless of where he was, which I found to be very impressive. Speaking of Houston, on the topic, Tank Dell obviously was electric at the Senior Bowl. The Shrine Bowl equivalent of that was Liberty's Demario Douglas. I thought he was very good. He played on the West team. I don't think he lost a rep in one-on-ones all week. I mean, he's a smaller guy, 5'9", 170. He'll have the same concerns that people are going to have with Tank Dell. But when guys are quick and fast and can catch the football, that is a very, very valued commodity in the modern day NFL. So he was honestly probably the most impressive player I watched from the collective of the East and West practices the whole week. Probably for the same reason that Tank Dell was impressive for you all in Mobile.
Absolutely. So a lot of names to add to the list of people I got to watch, but I appreciate you, Daniel, for sharing that insight. I'm sure there will probably be an opportunity at some point in the future to have you back on, and we can go through a couple of other Shrine Bowl standouts that actually were drafted by the Falcons a little bit later this offseason. But I want to kind of wrap up today talking with you about the combine that's coming up that begins next week. You are living currently in Indianapolis, so you can basically walk down to the combine, which I'm sure you'll get your exercise next week doing so. But I'm just curious, like for you personally, who are you going to be looking at and paying the most attention to at this year's combine? And it doesn't necessarily have to be Falcons related.
Yeah, when I was putting the list together for this, I was kind of bummed to find out that they did not invite UCLA running back Casimir Allen, because he told me at the Shrine Bowl that he thought he could break John Ross's 40 record. So he won the California High School State 100 meters. So I think I put some stock into that. But of guys who are actually there, I think you got to start with a few of the guys that are expected to test extremely well, especially at the top. I mean, Clemson defensive end Miles Murphy I've heard he can run as high as like the mid 4.5s. Like, I mean, he's at 275 pounds, I believe. So he's a big guy who's going to move really well. I'm eager to see how he looks in some of the flexibility drills on the field. Elsewhere, so Michigan has a defensive tackle named Mozzie Smith, who's 335 pounds, and I think he ran a 6.97 3-cone last year, which was the same time Aiden Hutchinson ran, if I believe. I think at like maybe 265 pounds, 255. So I'm kind of eager to watch him run around some cones. But there's a lot of guys. I mean, obviously, I'm eager to watch Anthony Richardson throw the ball in person. I think him and Will Levis probably have a lot riding on their stock this week at the combine, next week at the combine. Weeks are all messed up right now. But anyways, they got a lot. I feel like there's a lot they can kind of enhance their stock with a strong showing. And honestly, some of the things I'm looking forward to won't even come from on the field. It's the off-field interview process. Because, I mean, every team interviews pretty much every player, right? And so we're going to find out a lot of stuff, whether it's smoke, whether it's real. We're going to hear a lot of news about how some of those interviews went. And for that, I'm pretty eager to just kind of hear maybe who tested well, who performed well in interviews, maybe who was a bit off with some of the things that they were saying. Because I feel like Arthur Smith talked a lot about that last year, how when they were interviewing Ridder at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine, at his pro day, he was the same guy. And so I think this is a crucial part of the evaluation process as coaches and teams just kind of keep adding to the profile that they have for guys. So I'm kind of eager to see how that plays out. Obviously, I'm pretty eager to watch the wide receivers run the 40. That's always a pretty exciting time. I'm not entirely sure maybe who's got a real shot at the record this year. If you got any names?
Someone said Tyler Scott ran like a 4.29, the Cincinnati wide receiver.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm curious if he can break 4.3. I'm not expecting him to break the record, which is, I believe, 4.22 now. I'm curious if Devin Achane, I don't know how exactly to say his name.
Yeah.
Achane, the Texas A&M running back. I'm just curious how fast he's going to run. Typically, running backs don't typically blaze in the 40 at Indianapolis, but I feel like he should be the exception on that and getting into the 4.3s, possibly 4.2s. So those are the two super fast guys that I'm curious about.
I like that. Yeah. I remember a few years ago, Savon Ahmed of Washington was expected to run like 4.3 and ran, I think, like a 4.65. I mean, it's the unpredictability of the NFL Combine.
Yeah.
You gotta love it.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to Bijan running a 4.62 or something like that. And then all of a sudden the stock falls. All of a sudden.
Yeah. Hey, if the stock takes him down to pick 43 or whatever the Falcons second round pick is, I'm cool with that. You know what?
Okay.
We're on 4.8 of all I care. 4.8 with a 8-second 3 count. I'll take it.
I just know I might have to delete some tweets if he runs a 4.6. So
you and me both, brother.
Well, Daniel, I really appreciate you joining me on today's episode and sharing your insights, not only to the Shrine Bowl, some things to look forward to when we get into our combine coverage here on Locked On Falcons next week, a couple of names and, some breakout candidates, some splash moves and all that and more. Let the people know where they can find your stuff on the Falcons.
Yeah, so my Twitter is, I think, linked in the handle there at DFlickDraft. And then the website I write for is si.com/NFL/Falcons. If you search up Atlanta Falcons Sports Illustrated, you should find my work, find my authors page. Or you can just follow me on Twitter. And then I typically post most of my articles that I feel are readable. So, which selfishly is maybe about 80% of what I write, but there's been a surprising amount lately that I haven't tweeted. So off-season content at its finest. But appreciate you having me on, Aaron. It's been a lot of fun. No problem. I'll probably link to the article breaking down why Jessie Bates can help Richie Grant in the description below. And basically to underline the point I made on the podcast last week about how that makes sense. So clearly Daniel shares the vision. So, since we both agree on that, it is obvious and automatic that we are correct on that issue. So everybody check out that article. But Daniel, again, really appreciate you joining me. Looking forward to future conversations. Hopefully we will have some more this off season and look back at, some of the potential moves. We might have to do a Zoom high five if they wind up signing Jessie Bates or something like that. Yeah, no, 100%. If they sign him, I'm on the next day. If you want it, I'm on. I'll be on in a few hours if that's the case. All right. I appreciate that. Yeah. All right, man. Have a good one. So, guys, tomorrow I believe we'll have another guest. Want to thank Daniel Flick. I believe tomorrow, if my schedule is not confused, we'll be joined by Dave Choate of the Falcoholic. We'll touch upon probably a couple of these topics, like the quarterback situation, but also sort of Dave's outlook on this offseason and sort of what are the priorities that the team has to address, and we'll get into that on tomorrow's episode. So really appreciate you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. Continue to do so for tomorrow's episode with Dave Choate of the Falcoholic, and make sure you check out Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Braves as your second listens, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.